before I start, I really do want feedback. So, I mean, within the first 30 seconds, I'm going to say something stupid if I haven't said it already. But this is two aims. First of all, to lower your expectations. And the second being, I want us to have a conversation. That's the whole point of what it is that we're doing. So let me start. A brief history of South Africa. And go back to 1820.
So, I'm sure there are people in South Africa before 1820.
Very good, thank you. Come in. You just must be saying something stupid, but come in, because in 10 seconds I'll say something else stupid. So one of my favorite South African people is Desmond Tutu, and he has this wonderful quote which I'll read, which goes, "History, like beauty, depends largely on the beholder." So that when you read that, for example, David Livingstone discovered the Victoria Falls, you might be forgiven for thinking that there was no one around the falls until Livingstone arrived on the scene. And however, I'm in the next slide, I'm going to be talking about South Africa's apartheid history. And while it all started way before the nationalist government came into power, it very much was codified by the nationalist government that came into power right after World War II. Going through the years, from South Africa's independence from the Brits, and the British very much set things up so that black South Africans would never have a say in actually being South Africans, all the way through to 1991, which is the official end of apartheid. I was born in 1971, which is both, it is a challenge simply because if I was born 5 years earlier or 5 years later, I would have had a very different experience of apartheid. 5 years later, apartheid would have been something that I would have learnt about in school and not experienced. 5 years earlier, I would have been drafted into an army one of whose jobs was internal repression. And we'll get to that later. One of the questions I ask about myself is, if I was born 5 years earlier, would I have gone into that army that conscripted me? And I would like to say that the answer would be no, of course not. I would have been a conscientious objector. But it's really easy when I didn't actually have to make that choice. So assumptions people have made about me. The first being, I'm a white South African, therefore I'm a racist, and that's a bad thing. Hence, I'm a bad person. Well, the second, which is, I'm a white South African, I may be a racist. And the third being, I'm a white South African, therefore I'm a racist, and that's a good thing. And I'll tell you what, I'm okay with the first two. I don't much like the first one. But I can imagine that for most of the people in this room, if you can get to 9 a.m. without people judging you, that's the day you slept in. So, that nobody likes to be judged. I don't like it either. I'm actually okay with it. The second one, I welcome, because talk to me. Let's have a conversation. The third one, I take great offense at. That if people think that because of my origin, I'm okay with them being bigots, then we have a problem, and generally that problem makes me lose my cherub-like demeanor. The last thing is, I can't be an African as a white man. If you think that identity politics is unique to America, you're absolutely wrong. And about the best definition for an African that I've come across, because this conversation has been going on for decades in Africa, is an African is somebody who was born in Africa and feels an identity and a shared future with that of Africa. And to that I qualify, at least in my own mind. So let's talk a little bit about my story. Have a look at that sign for a second. And that kid's not me, but it may as well have been. Imagine spending the first 14 years of your life where that is normal. I look at it with hindsight and I'm chilled, but that was normal. There were no people of color on the beaches I was playing at. They were on another beach. And one of the things that I've had to realize is that that's got to leave a mark. That it is impossible that didn't damage me in some way. So at age 15, I was attending a very unassuming Methodist church. And we had a church pastor who probably lied to our parents and took us on a little bit of a pilgrimage. And he took us to places that I had, if I had looked, I could have found out about, but I didn't look. And it would have required looking. So we went to what was called, what became known as Ubuntu. So the nationalist government, rather than have to deal with these pesky South Africans who weren't white, said, okay, we're going to give you your own independence. It'll be just like Israel. And it'll be in the middle of the desert somewhere or in arable land. And by the way, there won't be any jobs there or any natural resources or anything. And we'll even give you your own passports for this new country that's your own. When you step forward to the HIV/AIDS epidemic that was South Africa, trace it back to the fact that the only work there was in the mines, and no women were allowed to live in the settlements in the mines. So think about prostitution, think about all of the disruption to family life. I tried to find a picture of Kotze House, which was the headquarters of the South African Council of Churches. I looked really hard until my colleague Evan found one. I tried to find a picture without police standing with riot shotguns. Now this was a church organization. Their only mission was spreading the gospel. Sure, they were a socially progressive organization, hence the riot police. But that was later bombed by the South African government in furtherance of driving sectarian strife. So we found a modern picture of Kotze House. It's pretty unassuming. At age 18, I was conscripted into the South African Defence Force. And again, I asked myself the question, if that had happened 5 years earlier, what would I have done? Because by then I had seen things that most white South Africans hadn't seen. And I just don't know. I just don't know. It'll be a question that will puzzle me all my life. What do you do in those situations? So I still have questions. Again, what if I was born 10 years or even 5 years? Second is, what personal responsibility do I have for apartheid? I did not once vote for a nationalist government. I didn't vote for any government. But to many white South Africans, the fact that they voted, especially of English descent, the fact that they voted for the Progressive Federal Party gave them a tick mark next to I am not a racist. Tick. But I know that the answer is more complex than that. And the third is, how do I feel about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And I'll speak about this for a couple of minutes. As part of South Africa's new founding as a country, they had a TRC hearings. And the idea was that if you came forward, much like what's happening in Colombia at the moment, in fact, Colombia was mirrored on South Africa's TRC hearings, at least what they're proposing in Colombia. That if you came and you told us everything you did, and it was racially or politically motivated, you got a pass. You didn't go to jail. You got to live your life. So I very clearly remember as a teenager sitting watching TV, which was all state-run, and seeing that the South African Special Forces had gone into Botswana and they found some ANC terrorists and shot them all up, and here's all the weapons they found. It came out during the TRC hearings that what actually happened is they did go to a house in Botswana, and they were looking for terrorists, but actually what they found was a school teacher and his family. And they killed him. And then they went into their stores and they brought out all of these weapons and put them on the ground and they see what we found. And there's a part of me that is so grateful that South Africa was able to get through what it went through without bloodshed that I at one stage thought was absolutely inevitable. I thought South Africa would have been Syria. But at the same time, these people had set up a system that was so evil and then subverted their own system in order to help perpetuate it. There's a part of me that I want to dig a large, deep hole, throw them inside, and leave them there. But the pragmatism that many South Africans have had to deal with is quite remarkable. So there's a marvelous book on the subject written by Ankie Cook, who is a white South African of Afrikaans descent. And she has a quote in Country of My Skull, which is absolutely fascinating reading and well worth doing. If you can't find it, let me know, and I'll post out my copy. And this is really the quote that struck me. How is it possible that the person I love so much lit no spark of humanity in you? And the first step, if you wanted the shortcut on how to become bigoted, is stop seeing the people on the other side of the table as human. See them as less than human, and then you can do whatever you want to them. The blacks. They're the thing. They're on the other side. They don't matter. I promise it's going to get more fun after this. Last slide. So what have I learned? One is that I, like everyone else, am a product of my genetics and my prior life experiences. All of them. Every single experience has added up to making me who I am. The second is that regardless of my complicity, I have benefited from apartheid. I've absolutely benefited. The 80% of the resources went to 10% of the population. I was among the 10%. I have a responsibility to constantly examine my thoughts and actions. In our much distant past, it was pretty useful to be able to make snap judgments about people. We were on the savannah lands in Africa, and I need to know whether that person was from my tribe or from another tribe. That was useful. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is, in the thousands of years since, we've evolved this frontal lobe that's capable of examining. We're self-aware, we're capable of examining, wait, I reacted that way, why did I react that way? And having, part of my challenge is to have the strength to be able to say, wait, what did I just think and do? The fourth is that I have an obligation to try and make amends when I've hurt people. It doesn't mean that other people have an obligation to accept my attempting to make amends, but if I sincerely do it, that's my obligation. If it's something I care about, if I feel like I've hurt you, you'll know that I feel like I've hurt you. I'm not just going to say sorry. It's got to cost me something. Nothing of value comes without a cost. The last is one of my favorite sayings, that I have a tendency, excuse the typo, to judge myself on my intent and others on their actions. And it's something I try to do, is to try and give other people the benefit of the doubt. If what they said just sounded awful, I'm going to try to give them the space to to take their foot out of their mouths and try again. But it's also realizing that my actions have consequences. Finally, I have an obligation to confront bigotry. And this is a hard one for me because I want to get along with everyone. And if I'm standing around people saying things that violate my values, I actually have an obligation. I realize I have an obligation. I can't just stand around. I'm party to it. This Nelson Mandela is, imagine if there was one person on the entire planet who could save 30 million people from killing each other. Just one human being. There wasn't a single other person in all of South Africa who could have done it. And I'll tell you what, if you lock me away for 27 years, I can guarantee you I'm going to be kind of pissed when I get out. We're going to have ourselves some anger issues. And this is a man who took all of that and responded with something like this. To be free is not merely to cast off one's change, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. I'm sorry, I get a little bit caught up when I think about just what he did. My other Nelson Mandela quote is that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, because love comes more naturally to the human heart than is its opposite.
Yeah.